Welcome everybody to Tropical Weather Update. This is the morning update on September 27, 2022. The latest advisory I have right now is the 8 a.m. advisory. This storm is really driving me crazy, and I think it's driving meteorologists crazy. Yesterday, the track was pretty well set that it would stay off the coast of Florida, get dangerously close to Tampa Bay, and then move north along the Florida coast and make landfall somewhere in the Cedar Key area. That has changed completely. If you look at the map currently, the National Hurricane Center forecast has it making landfall around the Tampa Bay area or a little south, and then going through the state of Florida. So Orlando and Gainesville now are in the direct path of this storm when they were not yesterday. So if you're in Orlando, if you're in Gainesville, if you're in Jacksonville, or anywhere in the central Florida area, you need to increase your preparation because the winds will be more dangerous now with a landfall further to the south and a landfall and a path that crosses the peninsula of Florida. Looking at the current advisory, you can see hurricane warnings are in effect now throughout the west coast of Florida. Obviously the dry Tortugas in Cuba, but now the hurricane warnings have been increased to go from Bonita Beach, Florida, north to the Anclote River, which includes Tampa Bay still, of course, but it's now further south because of the change in the track guidance. If I were as far south as Naples, Florida, all the way through the Florida west coast, I'd be very concerned about this storm and the change in the trend in the track to the south and to the east. Let's take a look at that. I like to look at this. This is from September 24th. They originally had the storm going through the peninsula of Florida, but then as you see, the track continued to move to the west. So my prior videos were saying, look, Florida, at least the east coast, central Florida was less in the crosshairs of this storm because of the trend of the track to the west. But then it started tracking back to the east yesterday, which I was concerned about. And I even said in my video, if you live in Fort Myers, Florida, for example, even Naples, you're not out of the woods yet. And you certainly are not out of the woods this morning because, as you can see, the track continues to move and shift to the east. And if we look at some of the models that we're going to look at, it may even come further south than the Hurricane Center. The Hurricane Center is conservative. It's looking at an average of a whole bunch of different models, some of which keep it offshore, but some of which have it coming onshore in the Fort Myers area and crossing just north of Lake Okeechobee. And based on the trends, all the models are shifting that way. So anywhere from Okeechobee, Fort Pierce forward, you need to be very concerned about this storm and prepare as if it's going to hit you. The good news is it should be in a weakening phase at that point and moving very slowly. So unlike Hurricane Charlie back in the day when that came through central Florida, it was moving at 20 miles an hour or even faster than that. And when it hit, it was a Category 4, which this one might be. But it moved through the state extremely rapidly, and so it still had a Category 2 strength when it hit Orlando. That is unlikely for this storm. It even shows on this map an S when it is in the Orlando area, because by the time it gets to central Florida in the middle of the state, it should be 24 hours or more from the time it made landfall, unlike Charlie, which reached Orlando within 8 to 12 hours of having made landfall, so it didn't give it as much time to weaken. Plus, there are other factors at play in this storm. Vertical shear and dry air that are forecast to move into the storm, which should weaken the storm significantly once it reaches the latitude of Tampa Bay, for example. And we discussed that in more detail yesterday in the video as to why that is. So today I'm just going to focus on the models. There's a lot of other guidance out there with evacuation orders and what else to do. I'm going to just try to keep this video as short as possible and go through the model guidance. But first, let's take a look at the satellite photo. It looks really good on satellite, a well-defined eye now as expected as it exits the northern coast of Cuba. This is a very dangerous and significantly strengthening hurricane at this point. But again, the strengthening should only continue for the next 24 hours or so, and it is not forecast to maintain this level of intensity when it approaches the Florida coast. It should be in a weakening phase by that point. That being said, that's just a forecast. Only God knows how strong the storm will be when it approaches. And the further south that it makes landfall, the more dangerous the situation is, because it will not have reached, first of all, it will not have had the time to reach the place where the development is unfavorable, and the latitude where the conditions become unfavorable. So if it stays further to the south, we expect a stronger landfalling storm than if it were to make landfall north of Tampa Bay. This is a visible satellite photo of it, and you can kind of see just the strength of the eye wall. It looks a little, it's easier to see some of the definition of the eye on the visible satellite. All right, let's now look at the tracks. As you can see, the Hurricane Ian model tracks, these are the ones used by the National Hurricane Center. These are the official hurricane tracks, have shifted significantly to the east since the last video that I've done, and just even since yesterday or last night. And you can see they all have the storm coming in along the southwest coast, somewhere between Fort Myers and Tampa, and crossing the peninsula of Florida and going right up the peninsula, right through the Orlando area, right through the Gainesville area, and through the Jacksonville area. So, and some of the models even have it going far east as Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach. And it keeps shifting that way, so I would not be surprised if that's what happens. Now let's look at actually some of the models themselves. This is the HRRR, which I use for tornadoes. So I figured it'd be, now that it's within the time frame that they actually do this model for, let's run it for Hurricane Ian. So it has the storm coming in around the Fort Myers area by Wednesday at noon. That's 16Z. I think that's about noon on Wednesday. They have the storm approaching the Fort Myers area. That's the HRRR. Let's look at the GFS model. The GFS model has it a little north of there, a little north of the Fort Myers area, and that's valid Thursday at 6Z, so a little later approach, and a little further north. Let's look at the Wharf hurricane model, and this is from tropicaltidbits.com. The last models were from Pivotal Weather, and I give credit to both of those websites in the description of my video. This is the Wharf composite reflectivity model, and it has it going north. It has it going again toward the Tampa Bay area, or even north of the Tampa Bay area. This is a worse scenario for Tampa Bay, because then the counterclockwise circulation of the storm will bring a lot more water into the Tampa Bay. The first two models I showed you, if it goes south of Tampa Bay, is great news from a storm surge perspective for the Tampa Bay area. But again, there's just so little certainty here. I mean, this is probably the least certain track I've seen for a hurricane in a long time, unfortunately. And so even my videos have been going back and forth. Is this going to have a west track or an east track? Right now, I would have to say the trend is east. So even though the HWRF model has this going a little further north, I have less confidence in this model than in the first two models. And now the HMON model, let's see what it has it doing. Crossing, of course, this is an old model, it looks like. But it also has it going closer to the Sarasota area, so somewhere in between Tampa and Fort Myers. I think this is maybe the more likely scenario, because you have some of them that are still taking including the National Hurricane Center, taking the center of the storm near Tampa Bay, and some of them taking it down near Fort Myers. I would say that's probably the most likely scenario, somewhere in between those two. So Sarasota, if you're in Sarasota, I think you need to be prepared for a direct impact from the storm. Later today, maybe I will get into more detail when I do my next video of some of the real specific cities along the Florida West Coast as we get better guidance on this storm. But my confidence level at this point is not that high. Right now, if I were to guess, I would say it's going to come in much further south than Tampa. Sarasota may even go south of Sarasota. Fort Myers, Naples really needs to keep an eye on this storm as the models continue to shift eastward and to the south. And the further south it goes, like I said, it becomes a stronger storm, and therefore a more dangerous storm for wherever it makes landfall. But it's better news for Tampa Bay. It's also worse news for Orlando and any of the central Florida areas that yesterday looked like was just going to get the outer bands of the storm as the center stayed offshore of the west coast of Florida. Now the center of the storm, although it won't be a hurricane most likely, maybe a minimal hurricane, but it should be a tropical storm, may actually cross central Florida through the peninsula of Florida, which was not forecast yesterday. So if you're in Orlando, you probably need to make more preparations than you did from yesterday. Anyway, that's my quick update for right now. I know it's not quick, still 10 minutes. I'm trying to cut these videos down so people watch the whole thing. But I will do another update this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in, and like the video if you can. Share it if you know somebody. Of course, there's a lot more guidance out there than what I'm giving you here, so I'm sure everybody knows about this storm at this point. I just like to try and provide some additional information specific to the model guidance that maybe other weather outlets are not providing. And thanks to Levi Cowan at Tropical Tidbits and Pivotal Weather for providing graphical versions of these models. It's very helpful to see it on the screen. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk soon. Thanks a lot.